Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Junior English, and we now turn to, in your hymnals, 1102, 1103 and following. And we are going to now turn to two of the most influential political statements in American literary history. Let's go ahead and just pause for a moment in your notes and point out that traditionally in an American lit course, you are going to study, of course, great American authors, writers, Longfellow, Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, James Baldwin. I mean, you do those kinds of traditional writers who are professional poets or, professional novelists or whatever. But every once in a while in American thought, we have to turn to individuals, and we're going to look now at two of them, John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., contemporaries for a while, who are not professional writers. They're not poets. They're not novelists. They are politicians. Or, in the case of, for example, Martin Luther King Jr., they're actually a professional minister who gets involved in the civil rights movement and becomes a politician. There are many who argue it's never what Martin Luther King Jr. actually wanted. What he wanted was just to do the thing he loved to do, preach. But he got pulled into a situation that we have to call it political, of or related to social dynamics, right, politics. We're going to look first at John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Of course, the dates are important, especially the second date, right, 1917 to 1963. You're, I'm sure, familiar with the fact that Kennedy pays with his life for the political positions that he took. Let's go ahead and read together on 1103, the author of the inaugural address, John F. Kennedy. The first heading, A Tradition of Service. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born into a family with a tradition of public service. His father, Joseph, served as a U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. His maternal grandfather was elected mayor of Boston. After graduation from Harvard University, Kennedy served with distinction in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Having barely escaped death in battle, Kennedy returned home as a war hero, and in 1946 he easily won an election to the House of Representatives. Kennedy served 3 terms in the House before he was elected senator from Massachusetts in 1952. 35th president, let's read that heading. 8 years later, in 1960, Kennedy won a hard-fought contest for the presidency. At the age of 43, he became the youngest person ever to be elected to that office. While he was president, he witnessed events as diverse as the launch of the first communications satellite, Telstar, and the signing of the first nuclear non-proliferation treaty with the Soviet Union. The United States teetered on the brink of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis and put its first astronaut into orbit around the Earth. Final heading, Fallen Leader. Tragically, Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. 2 days after the president's murder, Lee Harvey Oswald, who had been arrested for the crime, was himself assassinated. In 1964, the Warren Commission, charged with investigating the circumstances of Kennedy's murder, ruled that Oswald had acted alone. Nevertheless, conspiracy theories have continued to swirl about the assassination. And there you have a quote, a famous quote of Kennedy at the bottom of the page. A man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on. It's a compelling line. What we're going to do now is turn to page 1102 and the literary analysis information, and we're going to make some observations that are germane to both of the inaugural address as well as the letter from a Birmingham jail. That's the Martin Luther King Jr. passage that we'll be looking at a little bit later. Let's start at literary analysis and at 2B, rhetorical uses of the language. Persuasive writers such as President Kennedy and Dr. King use a variety of rhetorical devices. Of course, the word rhetoric or rhetorical, you obviously know, that's what we call our 2B reading, right? To clarify and balance ideas and invoke emotions. Let's go ahead and have 2 of these in our notes right away. Parallelism, write it down. The repetition of words, we've already seen this in some of the poetry we've been studying. Parallelism is the repetition of words, phrases, clauses, or sentences that have the same grammatical structure or the same meaning. For example, the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace. And you can see that the born, tempered, and disciplined are all part of this parallelism. The other term I want you to write down really quickly at 2B is antithesis. It's a form of parallelism that emphasizes strong contrasts, opposites. The example, now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, not as a call to battle, but as a call to bear the burden. And you can see the antithetical parallelism that's in play there between call to bear arms, call to battle, and call to bear the burden. The organizational structure of a text adds to its persuasive appeal. King uses, for example, argument and support structure, which consists of a series of arguments supported with evidence. By contrast, Kennedy organizes his speech around two lists, one a series of pledges and the other a series of directives or requests. And then finally, of course, comparing literary works. As you read, compare each writer's use of rhetorical devices and notice how the different organizational structures add to the power of both texts. Finally, in your reading strategy there on page 1102, the main or central ideas in a selection of the key points that the writer wants to express. The supporting details are the facts, examples, or reasons that explain or justify these ideas. And you're going to use a chart like the one there to the right to identify two or more main ideas and supporting details as you read the selections. Finally, and this is really important, put this in your notes, at the bottom of 1102, you've got 6 vocabulary words that I can guarantee you are going to end up on the examination. So you want to make sure that you are paying attention to those. All right, let's turn now to 1104, and this is the inaugural address of John F. Kennedy. Some have called this the most famous speech in American political history by a president. We'll obviously leave that one as a debate for you. Let's read the background information, though. When John F. Kennedy took office in 1961, the United States was locked in a potentially explosive stalemate with the Soviet Union and its allies. Fierce adversaries in the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were stockpiling nuclear weapons, creating the possibility of a disastrous war that would destroy the earth. In his now famous inaugural address, Kennedy addressed our nation's fears and reached out to our adversaries, even as he reaffirmed our nation's strength and the ideals of freedom. Now let's get ready to take a few notes just right now at level 1, just to make sure that we're getting set up for this one. We're going to do 2 things with this speech. We're going to listen to it, and we're literally going to hear John F. Kennedy deliver the speech. Then we're going to actually watch it to maybe get some sense of what's different between listening to a speech and watching the speech. Of course, by the time we watch the speech, we'll have already worked through some of the major ideas. Let's list some of those major ideas. Much of this speech elaborates on Kennedy's famous line, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Kennedy describes the United States as a bastion of freedom, and that day's Americans as heirs of the revolution that freed the country from oppression. He addresses the nations of the world, stating America's goal of freedom and warning against aggression. Finally, he challenges Americans to serve their country. Now, all we're going to do now is just read along, pay close attention to this speech. Hey, let's pause for a moment and just put this in our notes. We are looking at this speech as a work of literature, okay? So our challenge is to say, literarily, this speech that Kennedy is reciting, or is speaking, what does it do in terms of literary techniques, especially at level 2B? So we'll obviously want to pay close attention to it, all right? All right, here we go. Go ahead and pay attention. I'm on page 1104. Let's just listen to the speech now, and then we'll have some things to say about it. He has just taken the swearing in of the oath, and now he's ready to give the speech.
Vice President Johnson, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, President Truman.
You can read your footnote at the bottom to get a sense of all those names.
We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hand the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required, not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of our border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds, in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas. And let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house.
Top of 1106.
To that World Assembly of Sovereign States, the United Nations, our last best hope in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Finally, to those nations who would make themselves our adversaries, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction, unleashed by science, engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. We dare not tempt them with weakness, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course, both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed by the steady spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter that uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our cause. Since this country was founded, each generation of Americans has been summoned to give testimony to its national loyalty. The graves of young Americans who answered the call to service surround the globe. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though in battle we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.